Rakuten is the smartest way to save money when you shop because you earn cash back at over 3,500 stores. Fashion, beauty, electronics, home essentials, travel, dining, concert tickets, and more. Your favorite stores like Lowe's, Levi's, and Nike pay Rakuten to send them shoppers. And Rakuten then passes on a part of that payment to its members as cash back. You're already shopping at your favorite stores. Why not save while you're doing it? It's a no-brainer. Membership is free and easy to sign up. Get the Rakuten app now and join the 17 million members who are already saving. Cashback rates change daily. See Rakuten.com for details. That's Rakuten. Your cash back really adds up.
Hi, everybody. Sharyl Attkisson here. Welcome to another edition of Full Measure After Hours. Today, we are off to Portland, Oregon for my story, Hard Drugs, Soft on Crime. Oregon is attempting a big turnaround after voters approved a controversial law a couple of years back that, believe it or not, legalized hard drugs, including heroin, fentanyl, opioids, other hard drugs. Today on this podcast, I'm going to speak with Multnomah County District Attorney Nathan Vasquez, that's in the Portland area. I sat down with him his first week on the job. Such a fascinating case because after they tried that experiment with the hard drugs for a couple of years, it just proved to be disastrous. And even in very, very ultra-liberal Portland, Oregon, and Oregon at large, the legislature decided to rescind that controversial law and do a big turnaround, try to dial things back. A lot of other things happened about the same time they legalized or allowed the use of these hard drugs. There was also an explosion in homelessness, which in many places, like Oregon, coincided with the fentanyl opening up at the southern border, so much fentanyl coming in and so many drug overdoses, so much mental illness. They also did a big defund the police movement in Oregon during this time period. So all of these things together dovetailed to greatly increase crime and other problems, resulting in voters voting out the supposedly soft on crime George Soros-funded prosecutor that had been there for a couple of years and voting in Nathan Vasquez. And I think you're going to find this conversation with him fascinating. This is your first week on the job?
First week on the job as the Multnomah County District Attorney.
We'll dig in a moment, but if you can, in just a paragraph, what would you say, if people aren't familiar with Portland, is the story of Portland, like where you are now in terms of the criminal justice system and what's been happening? Again, I'll ask some specific questions, but how would you tell it on the book flap of a book about it?
Portland has been through an immense upheaval in the last, 4 to 10 years. We started seeing some changes, and then in 2000, Portland, it's no secret. We went through a massive series of riots. We had a new DA come in that was backed by Soros, and there was a lot of changes that occurred. And unfortunately, at the same time, we saw immense spikes in gun violence, property crimes, and crime in general throughout our city.
Would you say that this community experienced what some are calling on a national level soft on crime policies?
What I would say is that those policies certainly didn't help. There were a lot of factors that led to why we saw these rises in crime. But certainly those approaches didn't help us when our community needed it the most.
Are there any digestible, simple ways you can explain some of the changes that happened and what the net effect was?
Yeah, there was certainly a defund the police movement. There was really just an outright campaign to discourage police from even coming here. And we saw dramatic drops in our numbers of law enforcement officers. We saw some dramatic changes around our drug laws. And those things combined with some others really affected kind of the day in, day out work in the criminal justice system.
I remember hearing as an outsider that here they had passed a law that legalized possession of heroin, all kinds of hard drugs, which I think is in violation of federal law. but it was tolerated here. What was the thinking behind that, and what was the net effect?
Well, it's hard for me to give the thinking in the sense that, because I so disagreed with it even at the time that it was proposed, but this was brought from kind of an outside think tank group from the East Coast. And the reality is that Oregon, as a, small to mid-sized state, when it comes to population and things of that nature, we were the perfect environment for someone to fund this ballot measure approach. And it was an extreme idea that, had a significant impact upon our community.
What was the impact? Did a lot more people, do you think, begin carrying and using these hard drugs?
Well, we saw a few different things, and certainly that was one of them. We saw people coming from outside of our state to be here for that purpose. And we saw, just sadly, skyrocketing rates of overdose deaths. We saw public use just explode in our city. It's something that we have started to see turn around, and it's something we're working on hard. But it had an effect, both, a real human tragic effect, in that people we saw dying every day.
How long was that law in effect, and when was it overturned, and how?
It was approximately about 3 years is what it was. 3 to 4 years, somewhere right in there, because it came into effect, I want to say, in 2020, 2021. And then it was changed by the state legislature under House Bill 4002. And that was just this past year.
This is a liberal or progressive community overall, correct?
Very.
Do you think the community here favored trying these things, but as a whole have decided they didn't work? I mean, we noted that in your election, your opponent, the incumbent, still got quite a bit of the percentage of votes.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about this particular ballot measure, what happened was it was packaged in a certain way that made it sound very appealing. It was packaged that, it was going to provide all this treatment, and it was going to do all these wonderful things. And unfortunately, it failed to deliver on those. And at the same time, it slid in, and by the way, we're going to decriminalize all these hard drugs. And so it really was one that I think the public, felt like they were sold one thing and got something totally different. And here, just in this kind of past year when it was repealed, what happened was that, the public really came out strong and said, this is not working. And it was heard loud and clear by the state legislature, and they made the changes that were necessary.
Do you know, was this the only place in the country that had a law like that?
That was so formalized and widespread. Yes, I believe, Washington and California had similar, but not the same.
What has happened to the crime rates or the crime statistics in this area over the past 5-10 years?
Well, it certainly had a dramatic spike, and that was in the 2022 to 2023 range. It started to come down a bit, and that's very positive, and I'm very, very happy and excited about that. But we're still a long ways away from where we should be. It went, when we're talking about our homicide rates, we went from averaging about 20 to 30 homicides in the city of Portland to over 100. So we saw some really dramatic increases. And, when you're doing this in this line of work, that each one of those is a family. And each one of those involves, a whole just huge ripple effect where it dramatically impacts the community and traumatizes a great deal of people. The costs are terrible. It just is all around just a dramatic effect. But that wasn't the only area. I mean, we saw dramatic increases in property crimes. We saw stolen motor vehicles, just skyrocket. And that means that the everyday person who needs to get to work or take their kid to school, and their car is gone, it has huge impact on this community. And that really was something that, propelled me forward to seek office and to seek some changes.
To what do you attribute those rises in crime?
Well, I mean, did COVID play a part? Sure, it did. I also saw that the city went through a really dramatic time during 2020 with the George Floyd protest and riots. And unfortunately, out of that, we lost a lot of police officers. Our law enforcement, here in the county saw dramatic drops in their numbers. And that, makes it difficult to really get on top of some of these issues. And so that message also was one where, the partnership within our judicial system, our criminal justice system was broken. It was the message received from law enforcement loud and clear was that the DA's office didn't value them and didn't want to be their partner. And that was something that, for those of us that worked in the DA's office day in, day out, we heard loud and clear, and we wanted to see that change.
As you were running for election, what was your message, and how was that counter to the message of the incumbent?
My message was very straightforward and clear, which was that it's okay to hold people accountable. If they break the law, they should be held accountable. And we can do that in a compassionate manner, but that doesn't mean we don't hold people accountable. And, through it all, it was that we need a functioning system. We need to have a partnership with law enforcement, and it's okay to be a prosecutor. And that was the message that I put out, and made sure that people knew that they had a dedicated professional with over 2 decades of experience who wanted to do this job and do it for the right reasons.
As you've experienced the ebb and flow of opinions and what people think is the answer to the problems here, the same debate is taking place in communities across the country.
It does.
What kinds of things have you observed about, again, the ebb and flow of what's happening in other big cities?
I think as criminal justice evolves, what we're seeing is that, there were some big swings in 2020 and through those years, but we're starting to see people come back to that, what's hopefully a good kind of middle position, which is, hey, we want to see accountability, but we can still find ways to help individuals that are, find themselves in the criminal justice system. We can do things to get them into treatment. We can do things to help, stabilize their life so that they don't commit more crimes. I think particularly in this community, that is the mandate that is very clear. They want to see people get out of the system.
Go ahead. Sorry.
And just, across, the United States, we've seen that certainly down in Los Angeles, they've made a big change. In California, they passed Proposition 36. There's been a move, I really believe, throughout the country to say, hey, we want reasonable solutions. We want to make sure that there's accountability, but done very thoughtfully.
As you worked in recent years under this changing time, what would you say was the philosophy that was dictating how things were done?
When we talk about in the past 4 years, the philosophy was very heavy onto social justice movement. And there are a lot of positive, wonderful aspects of that. But at the same time, the message still needs to be very clear that this system here works and that people will be held accountable.
When it comes to money and funding, is it more expensive to handle the problems that arise when you're not prosecuting some crimes? Or do you think it's more expensive to try to prosecute the crimes that were being kind of let go?
Well, there's always a lot of different, studies out there on that. It is vastly more expensive when you let crime get out of control, and then you have to try to pay for all of the ramifications of that. I've seen some studies here recently done locally about, when we talk about these murders, and I mentioned that we saw, over 100 murders in a single year in Portland, and each one of those can cost millions of dollars. And, if we do work to both, I think there's a very valid role of prevention and working inside of our communities and working with our community-based organizations to prevent those crimes. But also it is having a professionally run office that deals with some of the smaller crimes as they build up to some of those bigger ones, that we can also play a really important role in heading that off and, not having to suffer those kind of really massive costs that come with these very, tragic crimes.
Is it fair to say that at a community level, trying out things such as legalizing possession of hard drugs like heroin, that was just a failure?
I've been very clear in saying that was a failure for this community. We saw it failing not just the community, but the individuals. And it's not that I believe that we need to lock people up, but at the same time, we need to be very intentional and thoughtful and make sure that we don't allow these situations to get out of control. We need to intervene with people and try to help them get stability and get them into treatment.
How have marijuana laws impacted the job of prosecutions and trying to reduce crime?
It's certainly changed it in a lot of ways. We don't deal with marijuana in the sense of it's legalized here in Oregon, and it's become a business. There have been some ramifications with that. We see significant robberies and issues related to the marijuana industry, so we have to deal with that. There's still the federal question that's unresolved,
which is that this is illegal from a federal level, but it's being tolerated in states that have legalized it.
Yes, and certainly I would love for us to find a balance with the federal system because it affects everything like banking. These are in Oregon, these are legal businesses that are doing a lot of transactions, but that means they deal with a lot of cash. And that means that they can be very vulnerable to robberies and thefts and things that we've seen quite a few homicides associated with that. And, for what I've seen is that as this has developed through time, these businesses are trying to become, very professional and credible and do the right things, but it can be difficult when there are certain barriers and limitations to how they operate.
Weight loss. It needs to be fast and sustainable. Noom GLP-1 starts at just $149 and ships to your door in 7 days. Take it from Lauren, who lost 22 pounds on Noom.
If I come off of the GLP-1, it's not going to automatically make my weight yo-yo back.
$149 GLP-1s? Now that's Noom smart. Get started at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. Individual results may vary. Not all customers will medically qualify for prescription medications. Compounded medications are not reviewed by the FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality.
I don't have a position on legalized marijuana, but we've covered it in different states and have been pretty much told that wherever it's been legalized, I don't know if it's chicken or egg, but mental illness, homelessness, crime, and even the illegal marijuana trade, which the hope was it would diminish if marijuana was legalized, seems to be blooming because it's so much cheaper to buy the untaxed version of the marijuana on the black market. So it just seems like it's not worked out well.
Well, there certainly are issues and problems, and I think we see that whether it's alcohol or marijuana, different ones, there can be ramifications that come with that. And as a society and as a community, we try to deal with those. And it's one that, my position is always this. As a prosecutor, my job is to prosecute the laws that are on the books. And I don't make the laws, but I make sure that I do my job in my role. And this is one where in the state of Oregon, they've said loud and clear that marijuana is going to be illegal. So that I go forward with that understanding.
Do you have a sense that on a national level, the proverbial pendulum has swung from more of a softer on crime mentality to more of a tougher on crime mentality?
I think it certainly has come back to the middle. And that's, so it has swung, I think, away from the, if I don't personally like those terms, but it has from the, what I'll call ultra progressive side, it's swung, I think, back towards the middle, which I try to find myself in kind of most squarely is, to do things in a way which I am holding folks accountable, but doing it in a very reasonable, compassionate way. And
then can you explain, you touched upon it, but sorry, how Oregon is a good test market or market for ideas to try out things that are controversial? Can you explain that?
Well, it's our ballot measure system or process. It's just that for this market, the investment compared to like California or New York or, even Washington, our state, we only need to get a certain number of signatures to get, a measure on the ballot. And then once that happens, it is a question of, well, what's the cost to then put together a campaign to support that? And so we've seen that as something it's occurred in our state quite a few times. And it certainly was the case with ballot measure 110 with the legalization of a lot of those hard drugs.
Any other measures that come to mind that happened with?
There was one here just this past cycle that was a tax on large corporations that was then going to turn around and give everyone, I think it was like $1,300 to $1,500 per year, something
like universal income or something.
Something of that nature. Yes, that one was proposed this last time, and it was put on the ballot, and it did not succeed.
So in some cases, outsiders come into Oregon and get these ballot measures passed to have it lead the way, maybe in some agenda. Ballot
Measure 110, the legalization of hard drugs, that was the prime example.
What was that group from the East Coast, you said?
Back in when they did the ballot measure, it had a slightly different name, but it was a Drug Policy Alliance was the big ones that, at least at the end, how they were named.
When you look at the next 4 years, what would you consider a measure of success for you?
Well, definitely seeing our homicide rates come down, seeing public use of these hard drugs, see that change, and to see a dramatic drop in our overdose deaths. Those are all things that, are very real examples of, what I would like to see. As a whole, I want this community to feel safe. I want, families to feel like they can use the parks. I want businesses to thrive in our downtown and people to feel safe coming back downtown.
And then lastly, is there anything that people who don't live here would be very surprised to find out about the criminal justice system and how it's operated in recent years? Anything that surprised you when it was happening, when you were working as a prosecutor?
There were some surprises that I think really helped spur me to this role, which is that, some of the changes, there was one around, there's the commutations ones. That was a big controversial one that came up in 2023 when our governor left office and commuted the sentences of a lot of very violent criminals. But also the district attorneys in each county were granted the authority to also do their own form, I'm going to call it roughly commutations, but we are allowed to enter into agreements to take someone that may be either in prison or has already served a sentence, but essentially to wipe out their sentence and get rid of it completely. That means it can include taking people who are currently serving a term in prison and setting it up so that they get out. And that was something that played out right at the end of my predecessor's term on a very violent, very just terrible crime. It was a murder and kind of home invasion burglary of 3 different families, one of which there was a sexual assault. I was very shocked that was even a possibility, and so it's something that while I see some value certainly in individuals that have served their sentence, maybe on a smaller crime like an old drug charge or something, and now they want to be productive members of the community, absolutely, let's do that. But when we're talking about violent criminals, and particularly those involved in sexual assault, that's pretty shocking to me that's something that we can do.
What was the justification given for that?
Twofold, I suppose. One is that it was believed that it was an excessive sentence, which certainly didn't shock my conscience, the sentence. And the other one was, I guess, simply to release this individual. It's one that now it's back to me to review this petition. I'm going to take a look at it and make my decisions.
When will that be?
I think there was a hearing scheduled in February, but ultimately I'll have to look at it and decide whether I want to go down that road or not. And there were 4 specific ones that got set over.
And then lastly, I just thought of one final thing. Obviously, when you're a prosecutor working in an office, you're doing your job. Mm-hmm. But clearly there are vastly different ideas and theories about what that job should be. Yeah. Was there a lot of discussion about that among people working these cases in the last 4 years? Were there a lot of people who disagreed internally with how things were being done? Or do people mostly clearly you disagreed, but do most attorneys keep their nose to the grindstone and just not think about it? What would you say?
Well, I would say that day in, day out, the folks that work in this office work extremely hard, and they are very nose to the grindstone. And sometimes it's very hard to come up for air and say, wait a minute, do I agree or disagree with what's going on? But I will say, in this office, the folks looked outside. It was when you walked out the courthouse doors, we saw the changes in this city, and it was terrible. And I know that I was not alone in feeling that way, because the Union of District Attorneys supported me in this election, because they saw that too. They saw that this community needed more. They needed a better approach, and that's what I'm here to give.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, one of my big, I would say, the other part that drove me was that while I believe the social justice movement is very important, the last thing I ever want to see is that victims are left out of that conversation. And that was something that I was very concerned about. And as a prosecutor doing this for over 20 years, serving families and victims of crime, that's something that can never be lost sight of. And it is always a huge priority for me and for this office.
Do you partner and meet with the mayor? Is that part? I mean, I know this is your first week on the job, but is that part of the thing to have discussions? And if so, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, I do meet with the mayor. In fact, we talked throughout the campaign time period. I met with him before each of us took office. And so it's something that I do regularly meet with him on. And, we spent a lot of time talking about this subject. It's a huge issue with our community. And he's put out some very, very aspirational goals. And I'm fully supportive of that, because I certainly want to see individuals who are, in such a state, living on the streets. I want to see them get into some stabilized shelter and, into housing. I want that. And so, of course, I want to help support that. But these are some very lofty goals he's put out. And I am hopeful, and I want it as much as anyone else. I just hope that he'll find the support along the way to get there.
Like, what are his goals? As he said, he wants to reduce, get rid of it completely, visibly, or?
I believe that was part of it. It was also that there would be enough shelter space for everyone who's currently unhoused, that that he would essentially within a year turn this all around. I mean, they were pretty lofty goals. And, I'm a little bit of two minds. One is I appreciate someone that puts out a big proposal and goal and says, I'm going to shoot for this. And hey, if we come up just a little bit short, we've made a ton of progress. I greatly appreciate that. I really do. And that's why I'm very supportive of his efforts. But there's a pragmatist in me, and I tend to be very pragmatic. And so I want to make sure that, are we doing all the necessary little individual things and working with, there's a whole host of individuals, whether it's community-based organizations, the county, the city, all of these, to make sure that everyone can hopefully work together to get us to that goal. How
does the homeless crisis impact crime, what you're trying to do?
Yeah. So it's an area that I think, like many West Coast cities, we've seen a dramatic explosion in our houseless population. And we've also seen a dramatic, increase in homicides and violent crime inside that community. Oftentimes they are our most vulnerable victims. And so it has a huge impact on what we do. And that's, at the end of the day, why I'm a huge, supporter, and I'm going to be doing everything I can to help the mayor in this area, because if we can make improvements there, then hopefully that will impact overall crime and help individuals and have less victims and less crime.
I'm not sure it's often said. Clearly, there are a lot of poor people and mentally ill and victims and substance abusers among the homeless population, but there are also bad people who come and hide among the homeless. There are criminals and really bad types that are there too.
I've prosecuted those cases, and what I've found is that these folks that are living on the streets, they're vulnerable. And so, unfortunately, there are people that will go and take advantage of them and commit a whole host of terrible crimes. And it's something that, I've been very diligent with and very vigilant to make sure that my office is really doing everything we can to help that part of our community.
Do you consider yourself a Democrat, Republican, Independent?
Yeah, I know it's a nonpartisan race, but are you public about any?
Yeah, no, it's here's how it works in Oregon and in Multnomah County.
Let me ask it as a question since he asked it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a Democrat or Republican or something else?
Something else. So I consider myself independent. It's a nonpartisan position. And for me, I've really kind of built my career on not picking a side, but really staying with what's the law and how do I prosecute it. And how that plays out very directly is that here in Portland, as we know, politics comes in, and we've had some dramatic riots and protests. And I've prosecuted equally both sides. I've prosecuted Antifa, and I've prosecuted the Proud Boys when, on the far other side. So I try to be very balanced in my approach. And the only question for me is someone breaking the law? That's the key.
My whole story on this topic airs Sunday on Full Measure, February 16th. I will also be talking with a police official about the trends and some recovering addicts. You might be surprised to hear what they have to say about that law that for a couple of years allowed the use of heroin, fentanyl, etc. To find out how to watch Full Measure, go to SharylAttkisson.com, click the Full Measure tab for a list of stations and times. Also, if it's easier for you, we feed the program live on Sundays online at fullmeasure.news around 9:35 a.m. Eastern Time, and then it's posted thereafter. So if you're listening to this after February 16th, you can just go to fullmeasure.news and watch the program there. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and that if you did, you'll leave a terrific review, subscribe to it and share it with your friends, and check out my other podcast, the Sharyl Attkisson Podcast. And don't forget, if you've been thinking about it but haven't decided whether you should buy my most recent bestseller, now's the time to do it. It's called Follow the Science: How Big Pharma Misleads, Obscures, and Prevails. It explains a lot about our corrupted medical establishment and the whole system that's resulted in us really dying and suffering with so many chronic disorders, as so much of our medical establishment didn't really seem to care but for treating them, but not getting to the bottom of what's causing them. Read some of the 5-star reviews at Amazon, and I think you'll be impressed with how much people say they learned, even those who consider themselves well-informed on the topic, and how meticulously documented these anecdotes and this information is in Follow the Science. Do your own research, make up your own mind, think for yourself.